The horizon went green. The wind stopped breathing, and then, like the sky itself had been torn apart, a funnel of black dust dropped from the clouds, twisting toward a lonely sod house on the Kansas prairie. Inside, a woman clutched her children under the bed, praying as hailstones the size of fists shattered the windows. This wasn't a rare disaster. On the frontier, it was a season. Tornadoes, hail, and windstorms that could peel a roof from a house and toss wagons into fields. For the settlers who braved the Great Plains in the 1800s, surviving the land wasn't just about drought or blizzards. It was about facing the storms of a continent still untamed. Today, we're stepping back into that world, a place where thunder was both music and menace, and survival meant more than courage. When most of us imagine frontier life, we think of wagon trains, open skies, and the promise of land. But the Great Plains, stretching from Texas up to the Dakotas, were also a battleground between humanity and the atmosphere itself. Every spring and summer, powerful storm systems rolled off the Rocky Mountains, colliding with humid air from the Gulf of Mexico. The result? Tornado Alley, before it had a name. In the mid-1800s, settlers poured westward under the Homestead Act of 1862, building farms and small towns across lands where native peoples had long understood the rhythm and danger of the weather. But these new arrivals didn't yet know the signs. They learned fast. Over the next 15 minutes, we'll explore how frontier settlers survived the continent's fiercest storms, what they saw, what they built, and how these tempests shaped the culture of the American West. We'll step inside a sod house during a storm, trace the rise of early warning systems, or the lack of them, and hear real stories of survival from settlers who faced down skies that could kill. Before there were radar maps or sirens, the only warning settlers had came from the land itself and from their own eyes. Old-timers said you could smell a storm coming. The air went metallic, like wet iron. Dogs grew restless. Chickens scattered. Many settlers, especially those from the eastern states, had never seen a tornado before. To them, the storms of the plains were almost supernatural. The Nebraska City News in 1860 described one such storm as a black serpent winding across the prairie, devouring everything in its path. Frontier families learned the warning signs through hard experience: a sudden stillness, birds vanishing, a cloud wall like a mountain on the move, the color of the light, sickly green, or sometimes a yellow haze that made even the grass look wrong. Native tribes of the region, such as the Kiowa and Pawnee, already understood these signs. Oral histories record that the Kiowa viewed certain cloud shapes as the spirits of the wind, signaling danger. Some tribes would move camps temporarily when the air turned heavy and electric. Settlers, in time, adopted similar instincts. Imagine being out in the open, tending to cattle, when you feel the temperature drop and the sky darken from blue to charcoal. There's no radio, no weather forecast, just instinct. You have minutes to run. Settlers quickly learned to build for survival. The typical log cabin or clapboard house offered little protection from a storm that could rip trees from the ground, so they turned to the earth itself. To understand how settlers endured these tempests, you have to step inside a sod house, a soddy. Picture it, a single-room structure, walls 2 feet thick, made from bricks of prairie turf cut with a spade. Each brick was heavy with roots and soil, stacked in staggered layers like earthen Lego. The roof? Often made of more sod, laid over wooden poles, leaking dirt and insects, but holding fast against the wind. When storms rolled in, these humble homes became bunkers. Unlike timber cabins that could splinter under tornado-force winds, a soddy clung to the ground. Its weight and density made it surprisingly safe, if claustrophobic. Settler diaries describe the experience in harrowing detail. Martha Adams of Clay County, Kansas, wrote in 1878, "The light turned to green and the air to breathlessness. We ran for the house and lay flat on the dirt floor. The wind screamed like a train, though I'd never seen one, and dirt rained from the ceiling. When it passed, the chicken coop was gone. So was the corn crib. But the sod walls stood." But sod houses had limits. A direct hit from a tornado could still tear the roof away or collapse the entrance. Some settlers dug even deeper, literally. They carved storm cellars beneath or beside their homes. A ladder, a lantern, and a trapdoor could mean the difference between life and death. Storm cellars were dark, damp, and smelled of earth and root vegetables. Many doubled as storage pits for potatoes or preserves during the off-season. Families huddled there through storms, listening as hail pounded the ground above like artillery fire. And hail was no small threat. Reports from 19th century Kansas, Nebraska, and Oklahoma tell of hailstones the size of walnuts, sometimes even as large as a man's fist, smashing through glass and killing livestock outright. A traveler in 1883 near Dodge City wrote, "The hail beat so fiercely on the mules that one lay dead before the storm passed. I measured one stone, 3 inches across, near enough." Without metal roofs or insurance, a single storm could ruin a year's work in 10 minutes. But settlers adapted. They began to reinforce roofs with thicker sod layers or even lay boards under the soil to deflect hail. Some covered windows with blankets or shutters at the first distant rumble of thunder. The frontier was a classroom of survival, each storm a brutal teacher. But even the best shelter couldn't save everyone. When the storms turned truly violent, when the wind took on a voice and the earth itself seemed to shake, there was nowhere to hide above ground. And so settlers did something remarkable. They didn't just endure the weather, they started to predict it. By the 1870s, the American frontier had grown from scattered homesteads into towns, Abilene, Dodge City, Wichita, dots of civilization in a landscape of storms. But one thing remained primitive: the weather. There were no official forecasts west of the Mississippi until after the Civil War. In 1870, President Ulysses S. Grant authorized the creation of what would become the U.S. Weather Bureau. But on the frontier, that was a faraway concern. Out here, forecasting meant watching the sky and trusting your senses. Neighbors warned neighbors by instinct. A farmer might ride half a mile to shout across a fence line, "Clouds are turning south, take cover." Church bells sometimes rang out when a storm built too fast to outrun.
One account from the Emporia Gazette in 1887 tells of a preacher who halted his Sunday sermon when the light through the window went green. "God's coming," someone whispered. The congregation ducked under pews as the roof tore away minutes later.
Despite the chaos, communities grew organized. Settlers began keeping weather journals, small notebooks filled with sketches of clouds, dates of hailstorms, and rough predictions. Many were surprisingly accurate. A diary from a homesteader near Salina, Kansas, dated 1882, notes, "Wind from the south, sky thick, air heavy, expect storm by nightfall." And sure enough, the next page records hail and lightning, lost 2 chickens. Some local papers published these reports, comparing notes across towns. This was the first Grassroots weather network, frontier meteorology, built from sweat and superstition. Even the railroads helped spread warnings. Telegraph operators, connected by thin wires strung across thousands of miles, would sometimes tap out coded alerts. "Wind heavy west, prepare." Still, most of the time, the storm arrived first. Let's step into the heart of a few true storms. One of the earliest recorded frontier tornadoes struck near Irving, Kansas in May 1879. It destroyed much of the town, leveling every wooden structure. Survivors said it sounded like a waterfall crossed with a cannon barrage. A farmer named Jacob Miller wrote afterward, "We laid in the root cellar. The noise was such I thought the world ended. When I opened the door, there was no barn, no fence, only mud and boards." The Irving tornado was among dozens that year alone. Without modern tools, people measured destruction by the horizon. Miles of flattened wheat, snapped telegraph poles, dead cattle half buried in dirt. Further south, in 1886, a massive hailstorm hit northern Texas. A rancher near Henrietta reported hail bigger than hen's eggs, some near to apples. The ice stripped bark from trees, killed sheep, and left drifts of white in July. Survivors shoveled it like snow. Imagine the sensation, the sudden cold shock in summer heat, the deafening roar of ice striking roof and earth, the smell of crushed grass and ozone. Afterward, silence, only broken by the drip of melting hail and the distant cry of livestock. Children often carried lifelong memories of these storms. Letters from settlers' descendants describe parents who could never rest easy when the wind shifted. One woman, writing in 1925, recalled her grandmother's fear. She'd glance at the sky every evening come spring. If it turned greenish, she'd gather us to the cellar without a word. She said you could never outgrow that sound, the roar of wind that shakes the soul. Frontier preachers sometimes saw divine warning in these tempests. Newspapers reprinted sermons describing tornadoes as God's plow, tilling the wicked earth. Others viewed them more pragmatically, part of the cost of claiming the land. In truth, both faith and practicality kept settlers going. Tornadoes were indiscriminate, ripping through rich and poor, believer and skeptic alike. But survival stories became community legends. The family who hid in a well, the man who lashed himself to a tree and lived, the woman who crawled half a mile through debris to find her children alive. Every storm carved new lore into the land.
The Great Plains were called the Great American Desert for a reason. Open, flat, and exposed, they gave storms room to build their fury. Settlers learned not just to survive them, but to weave them into their way of life. Homes were built lower to the ground. Chimneys were reinforced with sod. Some families even positioned their front doors to face away from the prevailing storm direction, usually southwest. And then there was the language. Frontier speech absorbed the weather. Phrases like, "The sky's boiling," "A cloud's a-comin'," or "The south wind's got teeth," filled diaries and letters. Weather wasn't small talk, it was survival talk. Communities held bee gatherings after disasters, neighbors helping rebuild barns, mend roofs, and gather scattered livestock. These events weren't just practical, they forged the frontier spirit of cooperation that defined rural America for generations. Children grew up treating storms as both terrifying and routine. Frontier school books sometimes paused lessons for safety drills, not formal ones, but quick retreats to cellars or ditches when clouds rolled in. Teachers told stories afterward to calm their pupils, often turning the ordeal into a lesson about courage and faith. Even art and folklore absorbed the chaos. Early prairie songs and poems described black devils in the sky or angels of ice that dance in the wheat. The storm became a metaphor for life itself, violent, unpredictable, yet awe-inspiring. And underneath it all was a hard truth. To live on the plains was to accept nature's rule. Settlers couldn't conquer the sky, but they could endure it.
By the late 1800s, the storms of the frontier had done more than test human endurance. They had rewritten how Americans thought about the land itself. The Great Plains were no longer seen merely as endless farmland or a place to tame. For those who lived through the tempests, the sky became a teacher. Its moods were studied with the same care once reserved for soil or seed. Families passed down weather lore like heirlooms. When the wind smells sweet, the rain's not far. When the leaves show their backs, run for cover. In that way, every storm became a classroom. When the newly formed U.S. Weather Bureau began to expand westward in the 1880s and 90s, it relied heavily on data gathered from settlers' own journals and local newspapers. Farmers and townsfolk who had recorded barometric readings and hand-drawn cloud sketches suddenly found their notes shaping national science. The storms that once isolated them now connected them through information. And something else changed too: architecture and attitude. Sod houses gave way to frame houses with stone or brick storm cellars built right beneath the kitchen floors. Town councils debated the best ways to warn citizens: church bells, gunshots, later even steam whistles. By the early 1900s, some frontier schools required that every new building have a shelter pit nearby. Those settlers didn't conquer the weather. They learned to live with it, to listen to it. And in doing so, they left behind more than barns and fences. They left a philosophy that survival isn't about dominance, but respect. It's the same respect modern meteorologists carry when they chase storms, the same mix of fear and fascination that makes us stop and stare at a dark horizon. The frontier's tempests still echo in every siren test, in every flash of lightning that catches a farmer's eye, because the frontier was never just a place on a map. It was a test of endurance, written in wind and rain.